All right, we're going to go ahead and start inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. For the love of our beloved Prophet and his beloved progeny, wherever you are, please recite a loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. I hope everyone is doing well, inshallah. Before I start with tonight's program, I want to congratulate everybody on the auspicious birth of Imam al-Hussein, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. And inshallah, as we continue with today's topic, we will be touching on some of the attributes of the third Imam, because tonight is dedicated to the Tafsir of Surah Rum, but we are also connecting and commemorating the birth of the third Imam as well. So it'll be kind of a mix of both of those, inshallah. So, before inshallah we get into our discussion, for those of you who had a chance to go through the quiz that was put out in the main groups, I'm going to start going through the answers to the quiz so that we can take a look at, first of all, see how many people filled out the quiz. I tried to make it a little, challenging, not too easy, so that inshallah it'll be, because really the point of the quiz is to get everybody to be able to review the content that we've discussed in the previous session without me having to actually go through it. This way, the people who are interested, inshallah, they take the quiz, and that way they can review the content and get an idea for how much they were able to absorb from the previous discussion themselves. So, as for now, I see that we have a number of people who have filled out the quiz. And inshallah, I'm going to start going through the questions now. I'm sure there's going to be some people who will fill out the quiz as I'm going through the answers. I'm sure we'll have some people like that because when we were doing the sessions here, we also had people who were changing their answers after we gave them the correct answer. So, judging by that, those same people will probably be taking the quiz right now, right, and trying to answer the questions. But on a serious note, I'll start out with the first question. And I think if you're on the website or you're looking at the quiz right now, I can show the responses to you as well, because this is a live quiz, and it will remain live, by the way. For whoever wants to watch this later, they can take the quiz before watching the session, and then they can take and watch the session later and see if they actually got the answers right or not. All right. So, first question was this. Who chose the name for Surah Rum, right? We said Rum, al-rum refers to the Byzantines. So who chose this name? The first answer was the name was revealed to the Prophet from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Second answer was the Ahlul Bayt chose this name. And third answer was the Muslims chose this name. And the correct answer is C. Most people, 73% is what I see here, have responded with the first option, which is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed this to the Prophet, the name. And that is not what we said in the previous session. We said that the names of the surahs were chosen by the Muslims and the companions, right? They were names that became familiar over time. They became famous over time. So these names are not names that are chosen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala necessarily for these surahs, right? And part of the reason for that is because we do find in history that one surah will have multiple names. Right? So that kind of implies that these names weren't necessarily chosen. People would choose these names, and many times they would choose multiple names for the same surah. This Surah Rum, it's also known as other names as well, as other names that are referred to as well. Okay, there you go. You have some people who just changed their answer. I'm going to have to, for those who are going through this, you're watching this for the first time, we do have an option on this live quiz where we can save the response or lock the responses. Okay, so I'm going to have to do that moving forward to make sure that nobody changes their answers anymore. But anyways, this is all just, to bring a little bit of fun to your Friday night, and these nights are the nights of Eid, so nothing better than that. All right. Second answer. There we go. I just locked the answers. So if you gave the wrong answer, there's no more chance to change it anymore. Why was the name Byzantines chosen for this surah, right? If people chose this name for the surah, but why? Why not choose the name, the Persians, for example, some other name for it? First option was because the Quran was speaking of their close victory. Second option was because the Quran was explaining their power and their strength. They were very powerful and they were very strengthful. It had a lot of strength, and we mentioned this and we talked about this, that at that time, the Persians and the Byzantines were the two key players, as they say, in the political, social realm of the world at that time. Or C, because the Quran was speaking of the corruption they created, 67% went with A, which is the correct response. So on this one, most people got it right, actually. Very good. Moving on to the next question. All right. The Quran predicted that the victory of the Byzantines will come how many years after their defeat? Option A is 3 to 9 years. Option 2 is a couple of years. Option 3 is 5 years. And D is 9 to 11 years. 89% chose the correct option, which was 3 to 9 years. How did we say it was 3 to 9 years? Because in the verses of the Quran, it said, Alif Lam Mim, غُلِبَتِ الرُّوم فِي بِضْعَ سِنِينَ. Right? These guys, they have been defeated. في بضع سنين وهم من بعد غلبهم سيغلبون. After them being defeated, they will be victorious. في بضع سنين. I believe it's verse number 4. Bid'a in Arabic is used from somewhere between 3 and 9. I put couple in there on purpose to trick you guys, because I knew that a lot of people would go for that. Only 11% went for it. So alhamdulillah, most people, they got the correct answer there. All right, moving on to the next question. What was the major difference between the Byzantine and the Persian Empire at that time? Let's take a look at the responses. Oh, see, this proved to be a difficult question for everybody. The first answer was the Byzantines were not as strong as the Muslims. Second answer was the Persians believed in one God. Third, the Persians ruled in the west and the Byzantines in the east. Oh, actually, I made a mistake here. The option says ruled in the west and the Byzantines in the west. It was supposed to be one of them east and the other one west. But anyways, indeed, the Byzantines believed in one God and the Persians didn't. Okay, so correct response, just checking to make sure I've locked the responses. The correct response is D, right? The reason why this whole Surah of Rum is talking about this is because the Byzantines were Christians, right? This was after Constantine had come into power, and he had made, of course, Constantinople as his, present-day Turkey, or, the capital of Turkey. I can't remember the name right now. But, the capital of Turkey, which is in a very key location. He had already made that his capital, and because he had made that his capital, he had made Christianity the formal religion of the whole Byzantine Empire. So they were Christians, right? And then the Persian Empire, on the other hand, they were polytheists, which means that they were mushrik. They believed in multiple gods, right? And the kuffar of Quraysh, when the Byzantines, who were monotheistic, they were defeated, the kuffar of Quraysh, they took this as a sign that the Muslims would also be defeated. Okay, so the correct answer is going to be D. Now, if anyone chose C, the Persians ruled in the west and the Byzantines in the west, that kind of doesn't even make sense. So even though I made that mistake and I admit it, but if you chose C, then you didn't read the answer properly. You didn't choose that. You didn't read the option properly. Anyways, okay, moving on. The Quran says the people who came before the Arabs were more powerful than them. Is this true or false? 78% said it's true, and it is true, because the verses of the Quran said that the people who came before you, they وَأَثَارُوا الْأَرْضِ, they plowed the earth, they built in ways that you guys never built. وَعَمَرُوهَا أَكْثَرَ مِمَّا عَمَرُوهَا, they flourished on this earth, right? And they had the earth blossom much more than you did. In other words, they had a civilization. You don't even have that civilization, is what the Quran was telling them. I believe it's verse 10, 9 or 10 from Surah Rum. So 80%, oh, you see, I didn't lock it. Some people changed their responses. Anyways, moving on. Next question. Locked. The Arabs believed that God was the creator of this world. True or false? You see, this was a trick question. The answer is true. Okay. Now, if you remember in the last session what we were discussing, it was this, that the Arabs, they did believe in God. They just believed that God created this world and then left it on its own. And if you want to get close to God, you have to worship these idols. So they believe that God is the creator of everything. They just didn't believe that God continues to intervene in this world, which is why in the verses of the Quran, a lot of the discussion is not necessarily about the proving that God exists, right? Because the Arabs of that time already believed that God exists. The whole discussion was, does God intervene in your day-to-day affairs? In other words, the discussion wasn't about whether God is there or not. The discussion was about the rububiyyah, the nurturing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That was the discussion. So the answer to this question, that 56% got it wrong, is that they did believe that God was the creator of the world. They just used to say, you know what, God created this world and he left it on his own. Now, if you want to be able to get things done, you have to go to these idols. And you have to get these idols to do shafa'at for you. You have to get these idols to do intercession on your behalf. And if you do that, then your problems will be solved on a day-to-day basis. And that's why they had multiple gods, because each one of these gods would deal with a different issue and a different problem. All right, moving on to the next question. I think this is the last question, if I'm not mistaken. When God asked people why they were worshipped others on Qiyamah. Well, that's a mistake in my question. When God asked people why they worshipped others on Qiyamah, is what I meant to say. They will do what? Okay, let me lock this. They will say because they were tricked by shaitan. They will say because their friends influenced them to do so. They will deny it and lie about it. Or the last thing is they will accept it and ask for forgiveness. All right, so I put this question as the last question because it's going to be the gateway into our new discussion, right? We mentioned that on that day, in verse 12 of Surah Rum, by the way, if anyone has any questions, I don't know if the comments section is working on the video or not. I don't think it's working right now, but if anyone can just reach out to me on WhatsApp, I can see your questions. Because this was a gateway into our discussion. If you remember, we mentioned in verse 12 of Surah Rum that whoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on that day, when he asks people why they worshipped other things, right, they will start to deny it and they will lie about it. And this is where we ended last week. Because we said that they will lie about it, and the reason they will lie about it doesn't really make sense to us initially, because you will lie normally because you want to get away with it. Right? You want to be able to get away with what you have done. That's why someone would lie, right? So in this world, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, sometimes he allows that in this world, right? It's possible. People will lie because there is a potential that you might be able to get away with things. At least for a short amount of time, you will be able to get away with things. However, we mentioned that on the Day of Judgment, everything is clear, right? Like the Quran says that when you walk in on the Day of Judgment, right? People can just tell by the way your face looks what type of person you were. Right? It is, as Surah Tariq says, يَوْمَ تُبْلَى السَّرَائِرِ, when the secrets, they come out. On that day, the Quran says people walk in, right? Some of them, their faces are dark. Some of them, their faces are shining, right? Then other verses of the Quran says, some of them walk in, their heads are down, نَاكِسُ رُؤُوسِهِمْ, right? Their heads are down. Some of them, they walk in, their heads are not hanging down, right? Their heads are high. Again, some verses of the Quran say that some people walk in, right, and there is as if, like the mark that charcoal leaves on someone's face. There is some of that. There's humiliation on their face. Some people walk in, no, they don't have that on their face, right? So the verses of the Quran already tell us, you walk in to the Day of Judgment, everybody already can tell what type of person you are. What's the point of lying? And then even further than that, and I've discussed this before when we discussed about the status of the human being and how the human being goes from being a human being sometimes to being an animal at times, God forbid. The hadith says that some people show up on that day, right? And they show up as animals. If someone showed up as an animal, right, he can lie and he can say, no, I never did this attribute that this animal has. But your lying isn't going to get you anywhere. So why is it that these guys will still lie on the Day of Judgment? That's the question that we brought up last time. And I was hoping that it would, inshallah, be, build some suspense and be a cliffhanger for you guys. And for some of you guys, it was. Alhamdulillah, you reached out to me and you let me know about that. The answer to that question now is this. Although it is true that a person knows on the Day of Judgment for a fact that him lying will not get him out of the situation that he was trying to get out of, even though he knows that, and it's very clear. And on his forehead, it says the things that he has done. I don't mean that literally. I mean in the sense that you look at him and you know what type of person he was and what type of things he did. Even though that is the case, some people will lie on that day still because they used to lie in this world. Okay? So let that sink in for a second. See, the difference between this world and the next world is that in this world, whatever you do, in the next world, it is magnified and it is brought to everybody's attention. Okay? In this world, you lie, but because people don't know you're lying, it doesn't show as a lie. In the next world, things are unveiled. When things are unveiled, in other words, that world is just a mirror of who you were in this world, but just magnified. In this world, if you were lying, you will still lie in the next world as well. Not because necessarily you're trying to get away from something, it's just because that world mirrors your behavior and your actions in this world. And because it mirrors your behavior and actions in this world, you will still be lying, right? God forbid, in the next world. So lying in the next world, it's not so much that the guy is supposed to try to get away with something. He knows he can't get away with anything, right? On that day, it's clear to him he can't get away with it. The only reason why he's still lying at that point, right, is just because what you see in that world is a manifestation of who you were in this world. In this world you were lying, in the next world you will be lying as well. The only difference is, in this world you could get away with things, in the next world you could not get away with things, right? So this belief that, or this idea that we have of why is this person still lying, it comes from the idea that we feel like this world and the next world, they're not connected with one another. No, they're completely connected with one another, right? It's just magnifying what you did in this world. In this world you lied, right? Well, then in the next world you will lie as well. You just won't be able to get away with anything. So it's very beautiful. These are of course teachings that only the Quran can teach us, brothers and sisters, by the way. It's not something that, this depth that the Quran is going into now is not things you find with, other sources, other religions, other textbooks. This is the Quran that can go into this much depth. Now, to elaborate on that, what you also find in the verses of the Quran is that not only people will lie on that day, and their lying doesn't make sense, but they lie because they used to lie in this world, and God has made it such that the next world is simply a reflection of what you have done in this world. Not only that, you will find other behavior from them as well that again doesn't make much sense, but they will still do it. Why? Because that world is a mirror and a manifestation of this world. Amongst those behaviors that again don't make sense, if you look at it from a worldly perspective, you might sit there and say, why are you doing this? You know you can't get away with anything now. But still, the Quran says that they do it. Amongst those is the arguing and yelling that they do on that day, right? And we have a portion of this, or an example of this, in Surah Al-A'raf, the 7th surah of the Quran, verses 38 and 39, right? That every time Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts a group of people into hellfire, they start yelling and arguing. And one of the things they argue about is that the people who followed the other ones say, oh Allah, you need to increase the punishment of these guys because these guys were the source of our misguidance. And the people who are the leaders, right, the bad leaders, the leaders towards misguidance, they say, no, you're not different from us. We didn't force you. So there's a yelling and arguing going on. Now, if anyone knows anything about the Day of Judgment, on that day, you know that only God has authority. Right? So what's up with this yelling and arguing? You know you can't get away with anything by yelling and arguing on that day. And yet they still do that in hellfire. Okay, that's one of them. Another example that we have, again from the verses of the Quran, is that they will point the finger at one another on that day. Again, that's not going to help you, and you know it's not going to help you anymore in this world, or forgive me, in the hereafter. But they will still do it because that is something they used to do in this world. When you do something in this world, it will naturally reflect itself in the next world, right? So just to clarify this point and this concept, what we find in the hereafter for ourselves is not things that God decides for us. It's just a reflection of what you used to do in this world. Only thing he does is he removes a veil, and all of a sudden you get to see who you actually were. That's the only thing that he does. Among those behaviors, again, that doesn't really make sense is that they will ask other people for help, right? The people in hellfire, they will ask people in heaven for help. The people who are dark and they can't find their way, they're lost on that day. They will ask the people who have light emanating from their faces for help. Well, why are you asking other people for help? You know that's not going to help you on that day, right? But they still do it because that's what they used to do in this world, right? When I say asking for help is not a bad thing. But asking for help when you know that that person can't help you, right? You're just trying to get away with favoritism at that point. So this is the reason why the Quran says on that day, you see here, on that day, that these guys will lie. When the Quran, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells them that you were worshipping somebody else, they say, no, we weren't worshipping anybody else. Ma kunna mushrikeen. You've got it wrong. We weren't the ones who were doing shirk on that day. All right. Hopefully that answered your question, or was a proper answer for the question that we had proposed. Okay. I'm going to move on. Before I move on to the tafsir of Surah Rum, because it is the night of the birth of Imam al-Hussein, I do want to touch on this point real quick. That I really see us sitting and discussing the Quran, studying the Quran, really as very, compatible with a night like this, right? Because what you find in the seerah of the third Imam is that this idea of reciting Quran, studying Quran was very much tied with his day-to-day activities, right? And we have multiple ahadith about the life of Imam al-Hussein and how his life was intertwined basically with the verses of the Quran. This is why you find on that journey that Imam al-Hussein was going on, right? When he was leaving Medina, Mecca, and then going to Kufa, and this whole thing that happened in Karbala, this whole incident that happened in Karbala. So when he's leaving the different cities, he will be reciting verses of the Quran in order to show that he is concerned and he is worried, right? Whereas a normal person will just say that they're worried and concerned, right? Like for example, they say when the Imam was leaving the city, he was reciting the same verse of the Quran that Musa alayhi salam was reciting when he was leaving Misr, right? And he was going to Madian. فَخَرَجَ مِنْهَا خَائِفًا يَتَرَقَّبُ. The hadith says that the Imam was reciting this. Or for example, in the childhood of the third Imam, you find that when he used to come back from the masjid, having heard what the Prophet was talking about, and his father would ask him what he had learned, that he was excited about learning the Quran, right? And he would come back and he would say, the Prophet taught me Surah Al-Ikhlas, for example. Then on other occasions, they say that we would see the third Imam, right? One of his companions says, I could see the third Imam, he was sitting in the desert, reciting verses of the Quran, he was crying. And on another occasion, and this one is probably the most intense of them all, on the night of Ashura, right? You know that incident that we've all heard, that the army was going to attack, and then the Imam al-Hussein sent out his brother Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas. What he told Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas on that night is, you go out because I want to have one more night where I can pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, do ibadat, and recite the verses of the Quran. So the fact that we're sitting and studying, reciting verses of the Quran on a night like this should not be too foreign for us. It should be very, very much compatible in our mind. That when we want to celebrate the birth of our A'imma, we do it the way they live their lives, which is going back to the verses of the Quran. Okay. I'm going to move on now to verse number 13. We ended here last week, and if anyone is sitting at home and you have a Quran in front of you, or you can have a Quran in front of you, do that so that you can, inshallah, focus a little bit better and stick with the verses. Verse 13 said, وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُم مِّن شُرَكَائِهِمْ شُفَعَاءُ وَكَانُوا بِشُرَكَائِهِمْ كَافِرِينَ. These guys show up on that day, and when they show up on that day, they don't find any of their helpers there with them. They were expecting on that day that the people that had promised them that they would be with them forever, that they would help them on that day. But they show up on that day and it seems like they cannot find, these shuraka. They can't find these partners, right? These people that they were relying on. And of course, sharik, for them it was idols. For us it could be anything that makes us do haram is a sharik. Because when you listen to somebody, right, you are making them sharik of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You are putting them in the status that is reserved for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So anytime we do haram, we are doing shirk. Not the fiqhi shirk. You don't become mushrik all of a sudden. You're still Muslim, right? But from a spiritual perspective, you have done shirk. That's why the verses of the Quran say, وَمَا يُؤْمِنُ أَكْثَرُهُمْ إِلَّا وَهُمْ مُشْرِكُونَ. Most people do not believe except that they are mushrik or they do shirk. meaning that they're Muslim, right? But their behavior shows that spiritually they are still, there's some shirk in there. Okay, moving on to verse number 14. وَيَوْمَ تَقُومُ السَّاعَةُ يَوْمَئِذٍ يَتَفَرَّقُونَ. When the day of judgment starts, on that day people will be separated. It's no longer like this world where good and bad are together. In this world, good and bad, you can't really tell the difference between them. You might go into a city, it might be a bunch of good people and a bunch of bad people, right? And that's why, I'm going to mention this point before I move on, when something bad happens to a city, or when something good happens to a city, because of the nature of this world, and because how good people and bad people are mixed with one another, you have to pay attention that when something bad happens to a group of people, or something good happens to a group of people, it's not that that bad incident is bad for everybody in that group. It's not that good incident is good for everybody. No, if you have good and bad in the same group, that same incident will be bad for the bad people, and it would be good for the good people. And this is the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That He can have one incident, right? But at the same time, that one incident can be good for some people, it can be bad for other people. If you guys remember before, we've talked about this topic, that bad incidents that take place in somebody's life, they can be a punishment to get this person back on the right side of the road, or they can be a promotion. Like he's been doing so well, God wants him to grow even more. So the same incident will be a punishment for a group of people so that they can wake up and they can come back to the right path. And it will be a promotion for another group of people. That is this world. In the next world, it's not like that. In the next world, these two groups are going to become mutafarriq. They are going to be separated from one another. Okay, how are they going to be separated? فَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ فَهُمْ فِي رَوْضَةٍ يُحْبَرُونَ. On that day, the ones who believed and did good, both of these factors are important. I'm going to come back to that later. The ones who believed and they did good, on that day, they will be sitting there. They will be benefiting from the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yuhbarun means when you are rejoicing in the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Rejoicing in the sense that not only are you benefiting from the blessing, but then the pleasure that you are taking from these blessings, they show themselves in the way you walk and talk, right? I don't know if you've ever been in this position, right? Like if you really win a big prize, I'm trying to explain the meaning of yuhbarun. If you really win a huge prize, right? It's a difference from the way you walk now. You might normally walk to your car, right? Now you might skip to your car, right? Now it's different. Now everything looks so much more beautiful in the world now. This is yuhbarun, because the happiness from the pleasure you're taking from that blessing is now showing itself in the way you walk, in the way you talk, in your facial expressions even, right? Sometimes you might be sitting with your friends, right? Who normally is just a very mellow, chill type of person. Then all of a sudden today, he's full of energy, right? And he's like, yeah, let's do this and let's do that. And I think that's a great idea. And you're like, wait a second. Is this some good news we don't know about that you're so super happy today? This is yuhbarun. It means you benefit from the blessing, but then you rejoice in it and it shows itself in the way you walk, talk, and in your facial expressions and whatnot, right? Imagine if you won a huge prize. I don't want to say the lottery because the lottery is haram, right? So I'm trying to use like a halal example. But if you won a big prize, for example, right? You won't just walk to your car. Right? When you call your family, you're not going to just say Assalamu alaikum like you normally do, right? It's going to be a whole new thing, right? You're going to be doing everything in a different way. All right, so this is what happens to the good guys on that day. And then he continues, وَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا وَكَذَّبُوا بِآيَاتِنَا وَلِقَاءِ الْآخِرَةِ فَأُولَٰئِكَ فِي الْعَذَابِ مُحْضَرُونَ. But those guys who disbelieved and they rejected our messages, our signs, and they rejected the idea that we would meet them on a day like this. Essentially, they did not believe in the things that they were supposed to believe in. أُولَٰئِكَ فِي الْعَذَابِ مُحْضَرُونَ. Those guys will be summoned and brought into hellfire. In other words, they don't want to come. We're just going to force them to come. Now, if you were paying attention, in verse 15 versus verse 16, there is a slight difference. When you're categorizing these two groups, God is categorizing them in a specific way. What is that? He says in verse 15, he said those who believe and they do good, right? But in verse 16, He didn't say those who disbelieve and do bad. Right? He left out the action part. He left out the deeds. Why is that? Because when a person, and this is something that some of us may not be familiar with, but when a person disbelieves, then their actions do not hold value anymore. That's why in the Quran we have a concept. It's known as the concept of habt, right? This concept of habt means a person who is a Muslim, right? Even if he has shortcomings, when he does good things, and I won't just say a Muslim, anyone who accepts the truth that is presented to him, right? Whatever that truth might be. Right? For you and me, it might be Islam and the Shia school of thought, for example. Even if he has shortcomings, right, then he's still considered a person who believes and does some good deeds at least, right? But a person, if this person becomes a kafir, he disbelieves. Now that he has disbelieved, all of those actions lose their value at that point. And they don't have any more value. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is a deeper discussion, I don't want to go into it because I want to continue with these verses, but I will just say this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't care about your actions only. He cares about your actions and the intention with which you do those actions. Okay? If you disbelieve in what God has offered to you in terms of the truths that He has presented to you, His existence, the prophethood of the Prophet, you know these truths and you reject them. What you do at that point doesn't matter for God. It's not like God needed help with charity. I say pay attention because this is a delicate point. It's not like God needed help with charity. He has all the wealth in the world. If He wants to give charity, He can give charity. He wanted someone to give charity having been humble enough to accept His existence. God, what He really needs is a person who has the right intention and he does things. Part of that right intention is that he is humble enough to accept the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Someone who knowingly rejects it, his actions don't hold value in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why here it doesn't say those who disbelieve and they do bad. No, when you disbelieve, at that point, in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it doesn't matter what you do at that point. Even if you do good, it's not going to hold value for Him at that point. Because you're missing the fundamental condition. Fundamental condition is you have to accept the truths that are presented to you. And if you can't accept that, if you're so arrogant that you can't even accept that, the rest of your actions, they don't hold much value in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So I'm going to move on from there. Verse 17 and verse 18 are special verses of the Quran. فَسُبْحَانَ اللَّهِ حِينَ تُمْسُونَ وَحِينَ تُصْبِحُونَ Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is flawless. He's perfect. That's what subhanallah means. It means He's perfect. حِينَ تُمْسُونَ when you wake up in the, or when it's nighttime, وَحِينَ تُصْبِحُونَ and when you wake up in the morning. وَلَهُ الْحَمْدُ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ and praise is for Him in the heavens and the earth. In other words, whoever praises anything in the heavens and the earth, they are praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is what this verse is saying. This is also what Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen means, right? It's not that you're just praising God. It means that anyone who praises anything in this world. If someone walks by a flower and says, oh, that's a nice flower, right? Or someone acknowledges the beauty of another person, technically they are praising God. This is what this verse is saying. وَعَشِيًّا وَحِينَ تُظْهِرُونَ and in the afternoon and at dhuhr. During all these times, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is perfect and He is flawless. It's just saying that He is perfect and flawless at all times is the point of this verse. Now, these two verses, because they have a deep meaning to them, right? It is mentioned that the Prophet has recommended to mention or repeat these verses to oneself over and over again. Hadith says that the reason why Ibrahim had such a high status is that he would read these verses of the Quran to himself. And maybe the hadith is saying that, maybe it meant that he would, repeat like another phrase, right? Maybe not the Arabic phrase, maybe some other phrase that had the same meaning within it. Maybe that's what the hadith is referring to. Nonetheless, these verses of the Quran are considered to be important verses of the Quran. Moving on. يخرج الحي من الميت ويخرج الميت من الحي. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings out life or the living from the dead, and He brings out the dead from the living. Well, the second one is quite obvious. How do you bring out the dead from the living? A person who's alive and then he's no longer alive. This is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bringing out the dead from the living. How does he do the other side? There's a lot of discussion on this part. A lot of them say it has to do with what we see a lot of times in the springtime, which we are in right now, and you might have actually noticed these past 3 or 4 or 5 days, right? That right when this quarantine thing hit, right, all of a sudden the weather is awesome, right? Everybody wants to go outside now, and the grass is growing, and there's blossoms and flowers, and all the plants are growing. This is يُخْرِجُ الْحَيَّ مِنَ الْمَيِّتِ. He brings out the living from the dead. And the verse continues and kind of reiterates this. وَيُحْيِي الْأَرْضَ بَعْدَ مَوْتِهَا. And he gives life to the earth after it was dead, which we see with every winter and every spring as well. وَكَذَلِكَ تُخْرَجُونَ. This is also the way that you guys will be brought back from the dead. Right? The same way these plants come back after, when you look at them in winter, you would assume there's no way this is going to grow. Then when you look at them in spring, then you're surprised. This is the same thing when it comes to the day of judgment and the human being being resurrected on that day. Okay, moving on. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ. The next 4 or 5 verses start with this phrase at the beginning. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ. And from his signs. Now, this is very important, these next couple of verses. And I don't think we'll just have time to go through 1 and 2 of the next verses. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ. And from his signs, أَنْ خَلَقَكُم مِّن تُرَابٍ. Is that he created you all from dirt. ثُمَّ إِذَا أَنْتُمْ بَشَرٌ تَنْتَشِرُونَ. This is a wonderful ayah. The ayah is saying, from his signs is the idea that you were created from dirt. ثُمَّ إِذَا. إِذَا means all of a sudden. This إِذَا means all of a sudden. ثُمَّ إِذَا أَنْتُمْ بَشَرٌ تَنْتَشِرُونَ. You guys were dirt a couple minutes ago. Now, all of a sudden, you are a human being that walks around, moves around, functions as a full-fledged human being. See, the Quran, of course, in the eyes of the Quran and in the eyes of God, that's not how it happened, right? Because He was with you through this whole process. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is comparing the beginning point of the human being, right, with the ending point of the human being. And He's putting an idha there to put like this meaning of all of a sudden, to show this drastic change that you've gone through, right? Parents know this. When you have the child and the mother is pregnant with the child, imagine that. And then the child is born. Look at him when he's like 4 or 5. All of a sudden, this child, right, that was nothing before, is now functioning with an intellect that no other creature in the whole world has. This is what this verse is talking about. You guys started from dirt, and then at the blink of an eye, that's my wording, all of a sudden, you turn into what? You turn into this human being that is fully functioning, and it does everything that it needs to do with an intellect that no other creature in the world has. This is one of the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just the fact of how the human being grows, how the human being turns into this full-fledged human being. Okay. Now, if you look at the verses of Surah Al-Mu'minun, verses 12, 13, and 14, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is also talking about this. This is those verses of the Quran that many say speak of this science of embryology and how the embryo will grow, right, inside of the womb, and the different phases that it goes through. I don't mean to go through all the phases, but at the last phase, when it talks about it being like, being a fluid and then turning into a mass, and then that mass turning into bones, and then those bones growing flesh on it, فَكَسَوْنَا الْعِظَامَ لَحْمًا. Then at the end, this is verse 14 of Surah Mu'minun, it says, ثُمَّ أَنْشَأْنَاهُ خَلْقًا آخَرَ. Then we do something else, right? We give it another creation. And many scholars say this other creation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about is that moment where the soul, right, is breathed into this, this small little body, this lifeless body at that point, right? So when the Quran says, ثُمَّ إِذَا أَنْتُمْ بَشَرٌ تَنْتَشِرُونَ, this is what it's talking about. You guys are dirt. You guys go through some stages. Then all of a sudden, when the soul is given to you, then all of a sudden, you are coming, you're going, you are a human being at this point. What happens in this process? This is a process that is very, very difficult to understand. I will mention this point before I move on to the next verse, because the next verse is very important, and we have some time left. I'll mention this point, that this whole concept of evolution, right, and how it comes about and things of that nature, and those who are believers in it, right? And of course, it's a very common scientific theory at this point, and it's in the minds of many, it's like indisputable at this point. And what Islam's take on it is a separate discussion. I don't mean to get into that right now, but this whole idea of evolution, right, and evolutionary biologists, what they will tell you, right, Richard Dawkins in particular, he will tell you is that all of this can explain how things can evolve from one state to another state. But the evolving of something that is dead into something that is alive. Life, how did that evolve? He himself explains that that is something that is very difficult to explain, right? And of course, he's like a flag bearer of evolution and the type of role that natural selection plays, and how the world has all this sophistication around us and whatnot, right? But he himself, in one of his books, I can't remember which book it is, if I'm not mistaken, it's The God Delusion. He's talking about this, and he says, listen, all of this that we're talking about, right, it talks about how things can go from one state to another state, but that jump that something makes from being dead to now having life, that is a jump where evolution will struggle to explain, right? And that is really what this verse of the Quran is talking about. When we send this soul inside of the human being, what happened? It's a process we don't understand. It's very difficult for us to be able to explain what happens that something that is lifeless now goes to something that is lively. And this you see, this mesmerization, this us being mesmerized and baffled by this is a sign of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, verse 20 is talking about that. Moving on to verse number 21. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا. All right, let me just check to see if we have time. And okay, very good. So we still have some time. I'll go through this verse and I'll end inshallah, although I may not be able to get through the whole thing. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا. This is verse 21. And another one of his signs is that he has created spouses for you. Min anfusikum, and they are from amongst yourselves. They're of your nature, they're of your fabric, right? Okay. Now, there are three key words in this verse that we're going to go through. The first one is this. We created them for what? لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا. So that you would feel comfort. You will feel like you are settling down with them. Sukun means tranquility and peace. If you know anyone who's called Sakina, right, given the name Sakina, Sakina means the tranquility and peace that comes to somebody. لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا means that you sit with somebody, you feel like you are settling down, right? And you feel like you are comforted. Things are calming down around you. This is لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا. Okay, so the first thing that God mentions, and I'm going to draw an important conclusion from this, that's why I'm emphasizing this so much. The first point that God mentions about marriage is what? About this companionship, is that you will feel comforted and have peace. What does that mean? That means that you have to be looking for someone who will bring about that peace and tranquility in your life. There's more to be said about this. I'm going to come back to this point in just a second. Let's continue with the verse. So the first key word is لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا. Second key word, وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. And he has placed between you مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. He has put mawadda. What is mawadda? Mawadda is love. It is mahabba that is expressed. Okay, this is the literal meaning of the word. وَرَحْمَةً. And rahma, we know, we call it mercy. Now, on a more specific and accurate understanding of the literal meaning of rahma, what essentially it means is the feeling that you have in your heart when you see someone is lacking something, an attribute, a good attribute. This is what we call rahma, right? You might pass by somebody, you see they don't have money. Money is, in your eyes, a good attribute, right? You can buy things with it. You then develop rahmah. You develop mercy in your heart. Okay, so the Quran is saying, first of all, we created you so that you could sit and be peaceful with one another and create peace. Okay, that's number one. Number two, second key word, is that there is a love between you that is to be expressed. That's the second key word. Third key word is that you are supposed to deal with one another with mercy. It's a very beautiful verse, and it's a very comprehensive a verse of the Quran that is explaining to us what a mutual life is going to look like. Now, first thing I will mention is that one issue we do have in our communities, right, and I was talking to somebody about this actually today, one issue that we have in our communities is that we see marriage as something that's supposed to be brought up when someone is 20, 25, 30, in the age of marriage. And yes, the details of who you want to get married to and all, yes, that has to stay for then, right? But there are teaching moments that a father or a mother are supposed to take advantage of throughout these years as the child is growing up, to teach this child and show this child what a proper mutual life is supposed to look like. The mother and father are supposed to speak about this. Why? Because preparing for a marriage does not happen when you're 20, 25, 30. That's when you get married, inshallah, right? And if for some people it may not work out, and that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has willed for them, and that's completely fine. If someone is trying and it's just not working out, then that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has willed for them, right? But the preparation for marriage starts from way earlier. And the problem that we have in our communities is that we have this understanding that no, you just live your life, and then when you want to get married and you find the right person, then you just get married. That's not the way it works. But what happens when you get married, I'll tell you the first thing that happens when you get married is, well, you have to now live with another person. You have to compromise. Well, were you compromising for the past 15, 20 years of your life? It seems like you weren't doing that. It seems like I wasn't doing that, right? Because no one told us that if I'm going to get married 5 years from now, 10 years from now, I need to start working on myself from right now, right? If right now I can't get along with my mother, with my father, with my siblings, what makes me think that when I do get married, right, and now I'm dealing with somebody, with the same person on a daily basis, right, and we are much closer to one another, right, which calls for more friction now, what makes me think I'll be able to compromise at that point? No, you want to prepare for marriage, right? From the financial perspective, you have to prepare for it, right? And I think that that's something that needs to be addressed as well. But from an akhlaqi perspective, you need to prepare for it when you are much younger, right? You need to start working on those akhlaqiyat that is going to get you through this marriage. And the most important of them is being flexible. The most important of them is having good akhlaq and being willing to compromise, right? In our communities, there are many points that I wanted to go through. I won't be able to go through all of them at this point. So the rest of this topic, I'm going to leave it. The rest of this verse, I'm going to leave it for next week, inshallah. But in our communities, usually, this idea of marriage is left for, okay, when my child is 20 years old, 25 years old, and they have maybe a physical urge, or maybe they have an urge to be with somebody else, like an urge for companionship, an emotional urge, for example, right? Then now it's time, oh, well, now you're going to get married, so now you have to compromise. No, it doesn't start then. It starts way earlier because these are habits that you have to build from a much, much younger age, right? And that is the mother and father's job of making sure that the children are working on that. And of course, they need to be working on that themselves. Otherwise, the son or daughter is not even going to, heed to what they have to say. Okay, so the first thing was لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا, that you guys are meant to come together, because when you come together, there is peace and tranquility that is supposed to happen. This, brothers and sisters, is the reason why, one of the reasons I should say, that in Islam, this issue, and this will be the last point and I'll end with this inshallah, this is why the issue of genders is taken so seriously within the religion of Islam. We now live in a world and in a society where the issue of genders and how these genders match with one another is now it's getting very blurry, right? I was filling out the census today, right? That many of you guys must have gotten in the email, right? Because I'm a good citizen. I was filling out the census today, right? And when it came to, okay, who are the people that are living with you, the options that were there were just a little mind-boggling, right? That you had so many options that might seem very unfamiliar to some of us, right? So this is getting very blurry now in today's world. And Islam is going to stand its ground on this issue. One of the reasons why Islam is serious about this is that when it comes to genders and the issue of people living together, Islam believes that the man and the woman are built in such a way that they can complement one another in such a way that the final ingredients or the final mixture out of these two ingredients is a peace and tranquility. Islam believes that this is not possible when you have a different type of combination, right? And I'll just leave it at that. It's not just the issue of, oh, well, maybe the humankind won't continue, and that's part of it, but the other reason is that Islam believes that the peace and tranquility that you need inside of the house will not be fulfilled when you don't have these two ingredients mixing with one another, the male and the female. If you have another combination, Islam is saying, لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا, is not going to happen. You're not going to feel that peace and tranquility. Why? Because we have built these two, male and female, in such a way where they have the potential to complement one another. I won't say they complement one another, because when you go into the marriage, right, there's so many things that you will have to change and fix, and you will have to compromise, and you have to be flexible. Right? But they have the potential to reach a point where they fully, complement one another, and that brings about peace and tranquility in the life. Mawaddatan wa rahma has a number of very critical points. Inshallah, I'm going to leave those for next week's tafsir session. We weren't able to cover too much, but these verses are really full of different points that we wanted to go through. Just going to check real quick to see if we have any questions as of now. Okay, I haven't received any questions. So inshallah, we'll bring tonight's talk to an end. I know that Sheikh Amin's session is going to be starting very soon. So inshallah, you guys can tune in over there. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.